Hello, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tech Exec Podcast, where I help you create teams worth leading. As always, I'm your host, Ben-Yosef, advisor and consultant to tech execs worldwide. And today, our subject is in the shallows. I keep saying here that I want to help you create an amazing team, right? However, there's no way around it. You also have to be amazing at what you do in order to create such a team. It is virtually impossible to create an amazing team with a leader that's just so. Sorry. However, there's just so much you can do to ensure you're not limiting your team. And that's what I want to talk about today. What do I mean when I talk about the shallows? I have this sense sometimes that when I speak with someone, I can see whether this is a person who's passionate about what they're doing, who's interested, who keeps learning, who's trying new things, as opposed to someone who's just, floating in the shallow end of the pool, not wanting to get to an area with too much waves, not wanting to risk anything, not trying to explore new ideas, new adventures, new concepts, but just content. And when I see someone too content, I have a bit of contempt because personally, I get the feeling, and I would also like to know that we have achieved some sort of equilibrium. I can just stick to what I'm doing from now on and always be safe. However, that is not how the world works. And if you have someone in a leadership position who thinks like that, who works like that, it's just dooming the organization. And I do not believe in that. I do not want to take part in that. So when I'm talking to potential clients, if I sense that someone is just looking for a sort of confirmation or permission from me to keep cruising, I try to head out because that's not what I do. I believe in always trying to learn more and improving. Now, to help you understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about shallow leaders, well, it doesn't have to mean that they're first timers. They can be people who have done this before. They might have already even had some success in the past. They might be people who know the basics. It's not like someone who doesn't understand anything. However, they essentially have stopped. It's like, they kept progressing to a point in time in which they said, okay, I think, I'm good. If you've ever worked with brilliant engineers, the best engineers, not the top 1%, the top 0.1 or 0.01%, which I've been lucky enough to have worked with, you see that these people don't just know a lot. They are voracious learners and keep getting so much information out of any opportunity they get. Because in our line of work, success and excellence doesn't mean that you know everything. That's not possible. It means that you're curious and you keep improving. If you do that for long enough, you're going to be really damn good. Now, when you look at those engineers and you try to understand what sets them apart, for me, I think that it is exactly this. They keep learning. They don't say, okay, I know enough about whatever, about front end, back end, I'm good. They keep learning. They keep asking questions. They keep trying things. They read so much. They think about the work. Learning a lot doesn't mean that you have to apply everything immediately, because then your organization might feel like every week things are changing depending on what book you're currently reading. That's not the point. The point is to be able to change things around so that it makes sense, which means it doesn't have to be that radical all too often. However, if you're constantly learning, if you're constantly reading, what you end up is getting deeper and deeper in the organization, in your skills, in your role, so that you have a better grasp of things. Compare, I don't know, the amount of math you knew when you were a third grader as opposed to the math we learned in university is amazingly more profound and deeper, yet it builds on the same foundations. So, yeah, I couldn't have done my university degree not having already a good math basis from school, yet I have to have a lot more drilling deeper into different areas in order to understand what was needed. And the same is with leadership. If, for example, you're content and you're no longer trying to realize what's happening, what's working, maybe you're still trying to operate with the type of leadership that made sense pre-COVID when we didn't have hyper teams. and we didn't have people working from home a day or 2 or 3 a week. Perhaps you're still trying to do things like you used to when there was a zero interest rate policy, and organizations just look different because you could always bring in a bunch of different people very fast. It was a market where it was very easy to bring in a lot of people and a new team if needed, as opposed to now where you essentially have these people and you're not acquiring as fast and you have to find a way to make them grow and improve. All of these things are different. If you're not constantly learning and thinking about the job, you will be left behind. So, my takeaway for you this week is to think, what are you doing actively in order to improve? Now, if you're listening to podcasts about the topic, you're already probably doing better than many of the shallow leaders because you're doing some active stuff in order to learn, in order to, keep your mind open, which is great. However, 10 minutes of a podcast a week are not going to be enough. What else are you doing? Are you reading? Are you taking part in communities? Do you have a coach? Do you have peers that you talk to about these things? Do you ever have deep conversations about what's happening? Like I really enjoy when I talk to people, past clients, peers, colleagues, and I talk to them about what we're seeing as in trends, what has been changing over the past year, what we're thinking is going to happen. And we know that there are going to be so many changes, right? Who knows what AI is going to mean for startups in the next 2 to 3 years? Or pretending we know, or we're digging our head in the sand, none of which is going to work. We have to keep experimenting, keep thinking. So, when I have conversations right now with people about what do you think is going to happen? How do you think our landscape is going to change over the years? What opportunities do you see? What would you like to see? What would you like to do? What experiments do you think will be interesting to perform in the next year? These are deep conversations that we have that allow us to be real leadership and not just, a performance leadership sort of role where you go to the meetings, but you don't do anything active. You're not actively pushing people forward. And if you think about what I've talked about in probably the very first episodes of this podcast, there's one subject that I keep telling people to do. Like last week, I recommended another executive to start doing it, and that is start having leadership blocks. Start having time in your calendar where you're just blocking an hour a week at least and thinking about the work, retrospecting how you're performing, retrospecting what's been happening, not being in the work, doing the day to day. Step back and consider with a broader view what's happening. What would you like to do? And that's how you become more profound. That's how you ensure that you're not just, floating around, but you're going from the shallow end to the deep one responsibly, with caution as needed, being cautious, but getting better at what you're doing constantly, always being curious, always learning. For me, not only is this the only route for long-term success, it's also the only one that's fun. And would you watch a TV show that's essentially the same episode every single time for too long? I'm guessing not. We need change. And if you're deep, if you're actively thinking about things, you're more likely to have these changes be changes that make sense, changes that are interesting, changes that fulfill a real goal and not just your need to change stuff. So do that and think about, this is probably the last or the one before last episode that is going to be out in 2024. Think about what you're going to be doing in 2025 to ensure that you're getting deeper and deeper as you're maturing in your role, in your career, in this life that's just too short to be average. That's it for this week. Thank you for joining me. If you missed last week's free live session, too bad. However, do check out my newsletter where you're going to find out first about the next ones, because I'm going to hold another one in the upcoming weeks, along with a new free thing I'm working on, which I think you're going to enjoy. So make sure that you're on the newsletter so you don't miss out on those. And I'll see you here next week.